Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. Today we're going to take a look at silver and the history of it as money. This is an infographic that comes to us from Visual Capitalists. A lot of these infographics really they don't make anymore. This is several years old, but nonetheless the content is the history behind silver is quite fascinating and stands the test of time, obviously. And this is something that's really quite fascinating because we can see how silver has really infiltrated so many different cultures throughout time with many different ancient civilizations. The word itself, ergiod in Gaelic, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, argentum in Latin, and Arjuna in Sanskrit, we can see the similarities between the different cultures. And since the atomic symbol for it is Ag, it makes perfect sense. There are four attributes that make silver so valuable to early civilizations. Number one, we have malleability. Now, the Mohs hardness scale, I'm not as familiar with how that's measured, but when you think about it, it's measured at 2.5. That doesn't mean a whole lot to most of us until you see with their explanation of it. It's roughly the equivalent to the average fingernail. Well, I guess that could mean as far as being able to hammer it out or whatever, and maybe before it breaks up, maybe that's a thing, but it's obvious that a fingernail is not as hard as how most of the lay people consider it as a silver bar or coin. Silver can be hammered so thin that 100,000 sheets wouldn't stand higher than an inch. Quite fascinating indeed. Now, most of us know that gold is even more malleable in that regard, but it's also a softer metal too. The aesthetics. And so it's regarded so highly because it's ductile. Silver's formability made it highly prized among artisans looking to create ornate artwork. In fact, silver can be stretched into wire thinner than a human hair. So that kind of builds upon the malleability aspect of it. So you can craft different things with silver, its ductility and malleability. And we've seen it in many cases with the coins that we so and metals that we and rounds that we so enjoy today. Especially a lot of the high relief pieces. It's lustrous. Silver can achieve the most brilliant polish of any metal, and boy is that true. Silver is very shiny. We know it's used in mirrors, and it's very highly reflective, so especially with the proof coins that we like in rounds. It's resilient. Silver is extremely corrosion resistant, and that is very true. In the right environments, it will maintain its luster. But this is something that's quite interesting. Silver only tarnishes when it comes in contact with sulfur. And boy, I tell you, it's quite fascinating because most of us see silver tarnish in our homes. But check out this fact, and I didn't realize this, that for most of human history, silver maintained its luster over time. Since the Industrial Revolution, however, small amounts of sulfur are present throughout the atmosphere everywhere, and silver is now constantly tarnishing. So that's the cause of it. Now, sulfur reacting, what causes PVC damage, that seems to be something that's really not mentioned here, but it's obviously in plastics and other chemicals. So I think silver does react with other chemicals, but tarnishing itself, the toning that we see, is because of sulfur in the atmosphere. So how do you provide a sulfur-free atmosphere? Good guess. We'll see, because apparently it's everywhere. Antibacterial. Silver ions actively break down the cell walls of bacteria, even at concentrations as low as 1 part per billion. Interestingly, it has no effect on cells of larger organisms. So we see that, so perhaps back in the old days, we've known that silver was used in medicine, but they didn't exactly know why. But that's part of the luster and attractiveness of silver in ancient times. Water purification. From Alexander the Great to NASA, people have used silver to prevent spoilage in stored liquids throughout history. Medicine. Silver ions prevent bacterial growth and speed healing time. Silver can be found in everything from bandages to eye drops for newborn babies. Preventing illness. During the bubonic plague, wealthy people ate with silverware and silver dishes to protect themselves from disease. Hence the phrase, born with a silver spoon in your mouth. That's right. Exactly. So in ancient times, they realized that, realized the value of silver with that aspect of as well. And most importantly, silver is valuable because it's rare. Today, all the silver ever mined in history would fit in this 52 millimeter cube. So that's about 1,464,700 tons. So it's quite fascinating indeed. And here we can see that a lot has been mined since 1492. So only 7% of this cube was mined prior to 1492, which means that in the old days, silver probably was a lot more valuable than it is today, because there's an exponential more amount of silver mined since then, and even especially since 1900. So though silver is still rare, it's not nearly as rare as it once was. And here this makes this portion of it admits that. And here, 74% has been mined since 1900. And silver is not nearly as rare as gold, but that does have advantages. Even the smallest gold coins were too valuable for everyday transactions like buying a loaf of bread. Silver was a perfect material for smaller denominations, and as a result has been widely used material for coinage in history. The history of silver as a currency, moving ahead here, and that's kind of the backdrop and the background for it is used as currency. And I'll bring a suggestion that I think possibly could be done to help solve and help bring some sanity back into our monetary system at the end of this. The history of silver is used as a currency with the backdrop of what we just went through, knowing its rarity and its uses and its benefits. Ancient Egyptians valued silver higher than gold due to its rarity in the region. That's right. Silver was very rare in the Middle East during those times, and even as today, silver is, in a sense, somewhat hard to get in the Middle East. The skin of the gods is made of gold, but their bones are cast from silver, is a quote often used. And even think about it, look at that makes perfect sense, because skin is softer than bone, and gold is harder than silver. Lydians mint the first coins using electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver. Very interesting. That was back in 564 BC. Lydian, that's right. In 482 BC, a rich silver deposit is discovered near Athens, providing newfound wealth and prosperity. In ancient Europe, the types of ores containing silver also tended to carry toxic lead. To avoid lead poisoning, the Greeks forced enemy soldiers to mine their silver for them. Wow, there you go. That's a way to do it. At the height of production, 20,000 slaves worked the mine, and a ton of lead was generated for every few ounces of silver mined. You see that connection between lead and silver. Today, we know silver occurs in many ores including types of copper, gold, lead, and lead zinc deposits. I believe also nickel, too. Silver is mainly mined as a byproduct of other metals. In 775 AD, the Saxon kingdoms of Britain used silver coins known as sterlings, using a pound of silver and 240 coins. The currency of the UK is still known as British pound sterling today. So there you little tidbit there, fascinating. And in 1492, Columbus discovers a new world and opens up new areas for silver exploration. The huge amounts of silver found in Mexico, Peru, and Bolivia reinvent the role of silver throughout the world and enriched the Spanish Empire for 300 years. During that time, those three countries account for 85% of world silver production and trade. And that's the foundation for the dollar. Indeed. And in 1516 AD, one of the greatest silver mines of all time is discovered in Bohemia, near Joachimethal. It alone produced 3 million ounces of silver per year at its peak in the 1530s. The coins produced from the mine, called Joachimthaler, were called Thaler for short, thaler, became known as the standard for European commerce. And thaler is very close to dollar. And we'll see that here. In 16th century Holland became a world trade power with its own version of the thaler. They called it Lewendaalder and used Daalder for short. You see the connection here. When the Dutch founded the town of New Amsterdam, now New York, they took their Daalder with them and it became the most popular trading currency on Manhattan. Locals called the currency dollar. New Amsterdam in Manhattan in 1614. There it is. Fascinating indeed. Now, in 1792, the newly formed United States of America based their currency on the value of silver. In 1792, on April 2nd of that year, by the way, was the U.S. Mint Act. And the first coins mined or minted from that facility started in 1793. And that was the smallest denomination, the penny. 1 U.S. dollar became equal to 24.056 grams of silver. And in 1859, the Comstock lode is discovered in Nevada. Kilometers of silver could be shoveled off the surface. The huge and unexpected supply of silver was a part of the catalyst of the challenges of the U.S. government and banking system would face over the next 100 years. They would demonetize silver, remonetize it again, and more. By 1882, the Comstock lode had yielded $397 million in ore, equivalent to more than $9 billion today. By the 1870s, the U.S. was the largest silver producer in the world, and yet production kept increasing for more than 40 years. And in 1967 AD, the U.S. removes all silver coins from circulation, and in 1968, it ends the redemption of silver certificates. The gold standard also ends in 1971 under President Nixon, making the U.S. dollar a total fiat currency. So quite fascinating indeed, and one thing that did miss there is that in 1965, all silver coins were stopped being minted by the U.S. Mint, and indeed, and that was under President Johnson. For thousands of years, silver was inseparable with a history and currency. Today, silver is a store of wealth and absolutely essential for modern industry and technology. And that brings me to my closing thought on this, and that is that since we've discovered a lot more silver recently, or in the modern age, I believe that we need a new coin here in the United States, a new circulating coin here in the United States. And I believe it could be a $5 coin, and it could have a measure of silver in it. Or maybe even a $10 or $20 coin or something to that effect. Something that could circulate, something that has intrinsic value tied with it as a dollar-denominated thing. I believe that is one way that we could pull in line that, as well as a rules-based monetary system with gold being tied to it, but also to have silver as circulating coinage today. What are your thoughts about that? We have the American Silver Eagle. That is a bullion coin that is circulated, but it has a dollar denomination, which is essentially makes it useless in everyday transactions. If you were to, but how about a half-ounce coin that's a $10 coin or something to that effect? Something where the government could essentially make money on it as well, or a $10 or a $20 half-ounce coin of silver, where the government could essentially make money on it, but it would circulate. I think that would be quite an exciting thing for the U.S. monetary system. It would provide some foundation of backing by precious metals, but it's just food for thought. I doubt it would ever really happen, but it'd be quite an interesting option to entertain and use, and it would get people to use cash again. But the powers that be really don't want that anyway, so it would defeat their purpose. But it would help, I think, bring stability to the currency markets and the dollar. So post your thoughts below. I would like to extend a multitude of gratitude to y'all for watching, and encourage you to please rate, comment, and subscribe.